Today's webinar, Digital Trends We Love for 2017, will be presented by Denton and Jessica DeJong. With that, I'll turn it over to our speakers.
All right. Thanks, Tanya.
Hello, listeners.
Here are our pictures without our sunglasses on. Really excited to be here today. So before we get into the trends, we just want to take a little bit of time to set up how we want you to watch today's webinar. And really, you can think of this like watching a fashion show. The intention is to be fun and inspirational. You're not going to like every trend, just like you're not going to like everything you see on a runway, but the idea is to kind of just see what's happening out in the space and then figure out a way to make that your own and make it authentic to your brand. So just kind of keep that in mind as we go through. So think of it like this example. You might see a dress like this on the runway, and it might tell you that purple ombre is the color of the season. I mean, Nate, if I had a dime for every time you wore a purple ombre to the office.
I'm tired of hearing.
So some people, like, select celebrities, they can pull it off, they can wear it straight from the runway. Most of us can't get away with that, but you might be able to take a part of this trend and wear it in, say, a sundress or something like that. If that felt even, too trendy for you, you could go even a step kind of lower and just, accessorize with a scarf or piece of jewelry that had that color trend in it. So it's really all a matter of degree. The sites that we're going to show today might feel a little bit out there, but I guarantee there's ways that you can make them feel like your own.
So who cares?
Well, we do.
Well, of course we do. We're designers. If we didn't care, we probably wouldn't be getting paid. But in all honesty, everybody should care. Design is a part of our everyday lives, everything that we do. And so particularly with businesses, it's really important to keep design in mind. And so we wanted to talk through a few points that really kind of reinforce the idea of how important design is to your business, your brand, and your customers' experience. So Nielsen Norman Group, who are really the foremost experts in the usability and kind of interaction space, recently came out with a publication that assessed the idea of the aesthetic usability effect, which we're defining here on the slide. And the aesthetic usability effect really just refers to the user's tendency to perceive attractive products as more usable ones. People who tend to believe that things that look better will work better, even if they aren't actually more effective or efficient. So that's pretty powerful stuff. And another really powerful takeaway from that particular publication was, in conclusion, they determined that users are more tolerant of minor usability issues when they find an interface visually appealing. So that's, the fact that you can have actual leeway with a nice, clean, beautifully designed website in terms of usability. We never want to design a site that's not usable, but to know that minor usability issues are more quickly forgotten when you have a beautiful site is pretty powerful stuff. Another resource that we've recently come across and really shared internally at One North is the future of design in startups. It was a survey done by NEA Group. And what they've done is they've polled over 400 chief executive officers and startups and tried to determine what is the power of design on their business. And so what they were hoping to learn from this particular survey was the top two is really kind of what we're focusing on for the purposes of today, which is what is the perceived value of design in a startup, and does design have a tangible impact on a startup success? Again, I mentioned over 400 participants, all sizes and scales, including Uber, Airbnb, as well as IDEO participated in this particular survey. And the results were pretty impressive. Everyone agreed that design definitely matters. 87% of startups believe that design is important, if not very important, to their business. 85% of startups have founders or C-level executives weigh in on design decisions. A lot of the listeners out there right now probably are very familiar with this, with stakeholders weighing in. A lot of C-level executives do weigh in on design. And then this one was probably the most pleasantly surprising, which was 31% of startups actually have a design founder. So the founder of these organizations are coming from a design background and really have kind of an astute respect for design and what it means to their businesses. And then in terms of kind of tangible, quantitative impact to business, is what this slide is displaying. I promise that we're not going to show too many more numbers here.
This is all we can handle.
Yeah, designers, not numberists. That's a new word. But across all key questions, the more mature companies, design mature companies, reported greater impact of design. And really, I'll break this slide down as succinctly as I can. You see two colors, the blue and the gray. Gray defines respondents of the survey that were considered design-centric, meaning that they felt design was very important to their business. And then the blue is respondents that were considered design mature, which meant that they had a founder who was rooted in design and or they had at least 20 designers in-house. So they really doubled down on design and really exponentially kind of increased their financial effort towards design. And here what you see is that with the design mature companies, 87% result in higher sales, 60% believe higher consumer engagement occurs, 83% have higher customer retention, as well as 60% faster product cycles. And even the design-centric, the ones in gray, though they're not quite as high as the design mature, are pretty impressive stats when it comes to the impact of design on a business. And this isn't something that's just a new trend. This is something that's been around for a long time, dating back to the 1950s. Going back to Thomas J. Watson Jr., who was the son of the founder of IBM and the second executive who took over his dad's company in the 50s. He actually sent out a memorandum in 1966 titled "Good Design is Good Business," and they've really lived that as a principle of their brand ever since. So this is a vast, sweeping kind of principle and philosophy that design definitely impacts business. So some notes before we get into the trends. We wanted to let you know that we're focusing on visual trends. Here at One North, we obviously have a lot of other offerings that tie to brand, strategy, technology, and all of those have their own specific trends, but we're really focusing on visual today. Many examples that we're going to be showing are out of industry. We get most of our inspiration outside of professional services. We really surf all corners of the web to find inspiration, so a lot of the examples that you'll see today are out of industry. Trends appear in no specific order, so it's not as if we're presenting these in order of importance or preference. It's really important to remember to stay authentic to your brand. You know, if a trend that we're showing isn't authentic to your brand, it will fall flat. And so while we're showing these trends, it's important to kind of put yourself and your business in through the lens, look at it through the lens of that particular trend and would it work for you, because not all trends, as Jessica referenced earlier, going back to the runway show analogy, not all trends are going to apply to you. And don't chase too many trends. You know, if you do too many trends, it ends up falling flat. So don't get too greedy like this guy who's clearly chasing all the trends on the internet. We had to get cat gifts in there. This is not the last that you'll see today.
I think we made it 12 slides with that one.
That's impressive. 12 slides in almost 12 minutes.
Yeah.
That could be a record. And then finally, one final disclaimer. We are on WebEx, and Jessica and I are presenting off the same machine. There is a lag on WebEx, so we're going to be pulling up lots of examples that have some great animations and transitions. We can't promise you that you'll see everything in exactly the same way that we will. Fortunately, you can't see us, so you'll also miss out on all the awkward handoffs between the two of us as we toggle back and forth between the trends. But as Tanya mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we're going to provide follow-up all the examples that we're showing today. So just relax, enjoy the ride.
All right, let's get into it. 2017 creative trends. So what we're going to go through today are 7 kind of categories of design and where we see the needle moving for each trend in 2017. So we're going to go over color, typography, dimension, layout, functional movement, or you can think of that as animation, UI animation. We're going to talk about video, and finally we're going to end with identity systems. So the first trend is color, and within this kind of fundamental part of design, there are really 3 areas that we see a lot of movement in the newest, most innovative designs. The first is courageous color and gradients, the second are duotone images, and the third are dark palettes. So I'm going to go through each one and kind of show some examples, and that's going to be the cadence of this webinar today. All right, so the first one is courageous color and gradients. We are seeing this everywhere. We are seeing really bright colors, really bright gradients that have kind of matured from when they started in Web 2.0 years ago. And a lot of this trend actually started outside of web design and started in areas like logo design. So, one example that a lot of us are probably familiar with is the redesign of the Instagram logo. So this top section is the logo suite as it was last year, and then they upgraded it into this much more modern, cleaner Instagram icon, and you see this very sophisticated, but yet still using bold color transition, and it kind of flattened that out, and so you see that cascade through their logo. This is brand new. I think it launched a week or two ago. This is Netflix's new documentary series about design called Abstract.
Very exciting.
Yeah, was very excited here on the creative team at One North. Check it out if you need something to binge watch this weekend. But we weren't surprised at all that for a new design documentary, they were leveraging gradients in that logo. All right, let's look at some actual website examples. And like Nate said, we're going to be showing kind of a combination of out of industry and in industry in terms of professional services. So this first is Stripe. This is an online payment system, and basically their whole background when you land on their website is this kind of beautiful blue gradient, very modern looking. This is the New York City Pride website, and this is actually really cool. As you cycle through, there's a couple images in this homepage carousel, and the gradient slowly transitions with you as you move through the content. So here's a new example. Accenture redid their site pretty recently, and if you scroll through it, you're going to see both those modern gradients as well as that courageous color. So it's really, really punchy, bright, bold colors that you're seeing through here. Now they went pretty much all in on this trend. You see there's really large, really large spaces filled with gradients. You don't have to go all in like that, and so I think a great example of applying this trend in a more toned-down version is what we see on the Drinker Biddle site, and this we launched last year.
What a beautiful site.
It's a great site, Nate. I wonder who designed that.
Oh, I don't know.
But you see here they've got that large image in the background, and then just that sliver of gradient at the bottom. Your eye really gets drawn to it, and that was the intent behind that design decision. Those are the latest insights, so if you hit that bar or scroll up, you would see, the most recent content from them. So kind of a good example of how to take this trend from the runway and make it authentic to their brand. Here's another example. So this is Lois Jeans. You see there's a gradient color treatment that goes over the whole image and it fills your screen. So I would consider this a straight from the runway trend, and if you want an example of how maybe you could apply this in a toned down version, look no further than Bloomberg's Business Week. So this, even for a professional site, this is a little more forward leaning. You see really kind of interesting asymmetrical layouts, large typography, bold colors. And if you look at their photos, they all have actually a very similar gradient that's kind of tinting the bottom of those photos. So just a way to make their photography a little bit more interesting, a little bit more unique. If I scroll through, further down the page, you continue to see that gradient treatment on the images. So just something to keep in mind. Here we've got a fresh site that we launched, fairly recently. This is Navigant, and this is their consulting company, and really, really kind of brave use of color. We've got this really vibrant green that really kind of punctuates the design. And so, again, this is a great example of how you can take a trend and kind of make it your own. All right, so the next category in color are duotone images. So this is when you take two colors and apply and use those colors to kind of fill out the photo. So here, this is a, kind of a funkier, more stylized photo because we're using blue that transitions into magenta. If you want a little bit more of a toned down duotone, you could use black and another color. So here it looks like it's almost just a green kind of wash over it.
A little delay there.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Nate. And then here's another site, and this one is using black and teal. So it can look very sophisticated when you apply this duotone imagery. And then an example of a more professional service-oriented, this is an HR and executive search company, and they're using blue and gray for this photo treatment. And this is really a great way to apply this treatment if you have lots of different photography styles, or maybe you have a set of images from various photographers. This is a way to make them all look consistent on a certain page or throughout the site, is applying a photo treatment like duotone. All right, so the last category for color is we're seeing an increase in darker palettes. For a while, a lot of sites were kind of copying that Apple aesthetic where it's a lot of white space, very crisp, very clean. That's not going anywhere. That's not going away. We still see a lot of sites with a lot of literal white space. But we are seeing a lot more sites launch that have just an overall darker palette, and I'm going to go through some of those examples. So here, this is Breitling for Bentley. You see it's very dark photography. It's not quite black and white photography, but there's minimal color on here. The navigation is dark, very, very subdued. And then it's funny that I mentioned Apple before, because if you go to apple.com now for the launch of the iPhone 7, they've actually moved totally to a dark photograph of the new phone. And we see Apple do this on different sections of their site. And it's a good example to show you don't have to, if you go with a dark, maybe a home page, you don't have to go dark throughout your whole site. So if you click through to the iPad page, that's that kind of expected light background. Here's Cartier, so we're seeing, a little more color come into this photograph, but I still would consider this a very dark palette. Here's the Ritz-Carlton, so again, it is a full photograph. It's not all black like those first examples were, but just the general feeling is darker than we had seen in the past. And then finally, here's a yacht company. Nate, I think this is where you got your...
yeah, you can barely see me through the glare of the front windshield.
Yeah, but one thing you might notice about all of these sites that I showed for the dark palette trend is that these are all luxury brands. And I'm not surprised at all that that's where those examples were, because there's actually academic research that shows consumers or users perceive dark sites as being part of a more luxury brand. So if you are looking to make your brand feel a bit more sophisticated and convey that luxury service that you offer, consider having some sections of your site, maybe that first impression when someone lands on the homepage, consider using a darker palette or darker photography. All right, next trend, I'm going to hand it over to Nathan.
All right, topography. So we're going to, again, follow that same cadence that Jessica set up. We're going to talk a little bit about a couple different trends that we're seeing within topography, serif, and also large display text. And also a lot of these, as we go through these, a lot of these you'll start to see multiple trends emerge on the same examples. And that's purposeful. Obviously, people aren't designing websites within a trend vacuum, so we'll point those out as we go through them. Serif, just a quick education. Serif, this is a nice way to remember it. I shot the serif. Serifs are the opposite of sans serifs. Serifs have the ornaments on the end of the actual character itself. So,
Nate, I put in a slide for you next. This is after we went over it.
Ah, hey, surprise, a cat slide. Not surprised. Surprised, not surprised. So here, perfect example again, thank you, Jessica, where we see cats, not literally, but typographically, with the ornaments on the end of each character versus on sans serif font, which does not have those elements at the end. I think one thing that we hear a lot of, there's this misperception with some of our clients that serif fonts are either antiquated or too traditional or not very elegant or sophisticated, and we really feel that's quite the opposite, particularly with the emergence of high-resolution displays and new web fonts. What we're seeing is serifs are beautiful, and you're starting to see the web really take advantage of and leverage that type of font. So we're going to show you a few examples of that. Here is West Elm Hotels. So you see a nice chunky serif font, really pops off the page and is very modern and sophisticated. So again, going back to the misperception that serif fonts are antiquated or too traditional, that's not the case in the examples that we're going to be showing. Here you see an HR and Company, how do I pronounce it? Carusi, thank you, HR and Company, where they have their tagline here, consultancy, directional, and training, in the serif font over a dark background. So this parlays nicely off of Jessica's just last trend she went over, which is the darker palette.
And I think, Nate, one nice thing about this is you can see that whoever chose this web typography really looked at the company's logo. You see it's the Carusi HR & Company. That's a serif font. It's got a beautiful ampersand. And so I think before people felt like sans serif were the more modern choice, but now we can really pick either a serif or a sans serif to be whatever's most authentic to your brand.
Yep. And then here, even the Washington Post, you know, we're starting to see a lot of publications really leverage that serif application. It almost is an homage in a certain capacity to like traditional print, but now there's elegant ways to display it within your browser screen. One of our favorite examples of sites that we like to talk about when it comes to usability, particularly legibility, is medium.com. And here you'll see a great use of serif fonts to lead the user's eye. What the characters actually do with the serif font, particularly for long-form content, is they lead the user's eye through the line of copy, which makes it very intuitive and easy for them to consume large forms of content. So a lot of the sites that we see coming out will use serifs as their body copy, not just the kind of display copy that we showed in the first few examples. Speaking of display copy, large display text is very in vogue. We're starting to see it pop for anything from homepage concepts to really pull quotes, but using large display fonts to communicate something very succinctly with a lot of brevity and then visually quite impactful.
It's almost like a design element, the word here.
Yeah, it's a piece of art. This particular site we're actually going to pull up live. This is using a large display font, but it's using it in a sans serif mode. Let me pull up this example here. This actually has some great sound too. This is Bang & Olufsen. You may be familiar with they're really an innovative leader in the audio equipment category. And as I scroll through here, I see this large display text. And if I actually click on something, there's this beautiful transition where it zooms in and the typography actually frames and sets up the detail page for this particular category. So great use of typography on the Bang & Olufsen Create site. Okay, going back to the PowerPoint. Oh, this is another one that we're going to pull up live. What we loved about this is it's similar in nature to the Bang & Olufsen site, but what Do is doing here is he's actually using typography as a design element, but an interactive element. So if I actually hover over the typography, it morphs and changes and reacts to the user's experience, essentially, by following the mouse cursor as it hovers across the page.
And this is one of those sites that I encourage you when Tanya sends out the resources afterwards. It's really fun to just play around with it. So definitely go to these sites on your own and kind of explore, and we're only showing, you know, small pieces of each site today.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, we're going to actually bring up an example of a site that we had the privilege of working on recently. Torrey's, a law firm out of Canada, did a quarterly report, and they really wanted to do something bold and impactful. So this quarterly report, we used this large display text and used typography as a huge design element. You'll also notice that darker palette coming into place here. So right when you get to the page, you're immediately introduced to large display text that sets up the quarterly issue itself. And then as I scroll, we're still using those large display fonts to have a bold design impact and quickly communicate to the client, to the user, what type of content exists within this quarterly issue. And if I click into the interior of one of these pages, you'll notice how we've carried that over even to interiors. So that large display typography is something that's consistent through the experience of this entire quarterly issue.
So next up we have dimension, and this is a trend that's kind of come in and out of vogue, and so we're just going to do a kind of a quick little review here. So in the early 2000s, you may have heard the term skeuomorphism. That's when the design actually mirrors the real-life kind of application. And then as a response to that, so skeuomorphism had lots of shadows, gradients, and people kind of as a really strong response to that, in about 2013, we saw kind of all the trends then were leaning towards flat design. Part of the reason for that was responsive design, part of it was just a reaction to skeuomorphism. And now in 2017, we're kind of seeing a return to dimension, but a much more sophisticated version of it. We'll call that mature dimension. So if you look at these buttons, these are kind of actual examples. You know, we're not suggesting gradients or beveling or shadows in the clunky way we saw it when skeuomorphism was popular. We still do see a lot of flat designs, and they are still beautiful in their own right, but we now have the ability to infuse some dimension with, you know, really subtle blue gradients, really subtle shadows behind it, and so we're just seeing kind of an increase in that.
It kind of goes back to the fashion analogy again. You know, design is cyclical, and so things that were popular once inevitably make it their way back up to the surface and become relevant again, but tend to evolve slightly. And I think the graphic that you just pulled up is a perfect example of that process.
So I'm going to actually go back into the browser here and show this site because it really is beautiful in both the visual design and the interaction, so I want you to see both. But if you look at just the design elements, so we've got the hamburger menu up here, this menu, you know, this piece down here, you see that really sophisticated, mature dimension coming through here. And then the next site I'm going to look at is this is a Google Chrome experiment. It's the Window Wonderland. So you might have seen this around, let me pull that up here. So if I enter here, you see there's some dimension visually, but there's also dimension because I'm zooming in and out for each of these window walks. And so here we're starting to almost tiptoe into the land of virtual reality, really interesting web technologies that power this. There's different, you know, HTML canvas, HTML5 canvas, 3D animations, WebGL. There's a lot we can do. And apologies, this takes a little bit of time to load because it's pretty intensive.
Never underestimate the laziness of the human condition where we can now window shop from the comfort of our own sofas.
So I'm just scrolling through this, and you see there's, you know, some depth here that they're able to communicate. It's really cool. Again, this is one of those sites I encourage you to go and kind of look, you know, on your own.
Would you wear that?
Yes, I'm wearing it right now.
Okay.
You just can't tell.
Good question.
And then this is a really cool site that I'm going to pull up. This is the view from above with an airline. And there's a kind of a cool loading animation that hopefully is coming through. And so this is kind of the maximum application of this trend. It's so three-dimensional you're in outer space.
Yeah.
So it's quite literal. But once this globe loads, you'll see it kind of spins around, and then I'm able to interact with.
By the way, stakeholders love globes. Just FYI, that's one thing that I don't know if we have a client.
SCH trend.
Yeah, this is applicable to almost all audiences.
So you can see if I'm moving it around, I can click on each of these dots and it will zoom me in. It will actually launch video that I'm not going to play right now. Here, I'll zoom back out. So
this is a perfect example, as you were mentioning, because we can see it over here. It's very jittery on the WebEx, but seamless, beautiful, elegant transitions within the globe and the videos.
So I'd encourage you to go online and experiment with that. So again, that's just wrapping up dimension. Dimension can be both visual and interactive, and there's lots of different technologies that we have at our disposal to kind of experiment with that.
So now getting into layout, we're going to show some layout trends, and those trends are asymmetry, brave layouts, as well as negative space. So asymmetrical grid is essentially just breaking up that traditional aligned and justified grid. And I think when we saw the emergence of responsive design, you saw the design world really quickly conform to making everything line up perfectly, because responsive design was all about these grids, and we were still figuring responsive design out. So with all the tile designs and with all the grids as the foundation, everything was lining up perfectly. Now we're starting to see that grid start to get blown out and start to breathe a little bit. So here we're going to see some examples of some asymmetrical designs, which really add like a layer of character and interest and organicness to the design and to the interface itself, which can be really beautiful. Here with Ortiz-Leon, there's still an underlying grid here, but it's not as predictable, it's not as symmetrical as you may see on a corporate grid, which we will talk a little bit more later. Yes, foreshadowing there. And with this particular site, they do a great job of really combining, we talked about some of those advanced trend sites where they combine a lot of different trends that we're seeing. Here we see an example of a site that includes dimension, includes bold colors, and also that asymmetrical design. So Mr. Mugatu clearly identifying this as a So Hot Right Now website, because again, we're seeing the large display font, we're seeing the depth and dimension, the bold color, and the asymmetrical design. Hats off to this site. They did a really tremendous job with the layout and with incorporating trends that didn't feel forced and was true to their brand. Brave layout. So this is, I mean, there's some braveness in asymmetry just in general, but this is kind of pushing the envelope a little further with brave layouts. Here we see a design where it's less predictable. There's some numbers in there to give it a little bit of structure, but in terms of the layout and how the different tiles within the system align to each other, it's much more unexpected than one would tend to see on a site. Here we see a site that, this is a mini site that was done for the Hunger Games, so very brave, bold design, kind of blowing up the grid, and this one actually scrolls horizontally, so as you interact with it, it starts to kind of revolve and introduce new layers and elements of the design in a horizontal fashion. And this one we wanted to pull up. We're actually going to show this one a couple times today. This is Lexus. They have a magazine site. Let me pull this up. This is a site that Lexus uses to really show their innovation and publishes lots of pieces on innovation design and what's going on in the Lexus world. And you'll notice this very brave layout. It's got a very subtle movement. It's probably not showing up great on the WebEx, but if you'll notice like this background, you can see how it's starting to peek out from the boat image. If I start to scroll, it kind of zooms out. I can also zoom into other stories. And so again, this whole site is about design, innovation, pushing the envelope, and so this trend is taking it far in terms of brave layout, but it's authentic to the theme and to the brand of this particular site. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to dive a little deeper into this particular example and show some other nuts and bolts behind the interface within this Lexus site.
I think this is a perfect example because it really encourages like nonlinear exploration of the content, and it's kind of a make your own, choose your own adventure.
Yeah. I love those books. Negative space. Now, negative space, we wanted to make sure it was clear to everybody what we mean by negative space. It's not negative space in the sense that it's a bad thing. When we talk about negative space, we talk about the idea of just empty space. So we wanted to show you an example of how negative space is really becoming very trendy, it's becoming very prevalent in web design. Here you see Bavaria and Del Chiato. These Italian sites, they get me every time. But you'll notice a lot of negative space around the topography, around the panels, very open, very clean. You know, what we know now is that users are going to scroll. We don't have to force all the content onto the page as much as possible. It's not, you know, a printed piece of collateral or a newspaper where what you see is what you get. And so introducing negative space, in fact, our art director, Mike Corey, recently did a blog post on negative space and kind of some of the principles and benefits of designing with negative space in mind. So I encourage you to go to the onenorth.com website, check out the ideas section, and you can find his blog there about negative space. Citadella, which is a travel site, beautiful. You get to the home page. There's obviously some imagery there, but nice, clean white space at the top, very succinct, and I'm going on an adventure. Now, where do I want to go? And it actually takes it into the detailed pages as well, so if I were to click on something like Prague, notice I can scroll this page and there's a lot more content further down on the page, but that open airiness is really refreshing, and it works with their brand. That negative space allows me to not feel overwhelmed, so I can concentrate on specific elements within the layout one at a time and digest that information as I see fit. A lot of people, when they say negative space, they sometimes refer to it as white space. This particular example shows that white space, quote, white, unquote, space, doesn't mean the color. So here you can have negative space by using bold color. Again, a trend that we saw earlier, but now being leveraged to position elements within a lot of negative space. And then here's the New York Times Magazine site. When you pull up one of their articles, it actually fills the entire page. They know that you know that there's more content and that you can scroll and you can read, but when you first get there, it fills it up almost like the cover of a book. You have this beautiful, bold, large display typeface, and then when you start to scroll, it starts to introduce the content. But what I want you to pay attention to here is all the negative space around the actual content. They're not trying to cram a ton of information in the right rail or force more content down your throat. They're following like best practices in terms of use of balance and white space and making sure that the width of the actual content column is of the appropriate width so that it's easy to read and easier for the eye to track. So remember, negative space is your friend. It's not a bad thing like Justin Bieber in outer space.
Great segue.
Yes.
All right, so now we're going to talk about functional movement. You know, in years past, we talked about trends like microinteractions, and animation has really kind of grown up since then. So, you know, I'm going to talk about just kind of general principles of using motion in your UI. Then we're going to talk a little bit about inspiration from apps, and then we'll finish with some perceived performance tips. So motion principles, this is a blurb from Google's material design, which we'll reference a little bit later as well, but they do a really good job of defining motion and the benefits that motion provides. So motion is not just a superfluous kind of addition to the design. It actually conveys meaning and helps orient a user, you know, where they came from and where they might be going. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about this, on the materialdesign.io website, they actually have a great article called Making Motion Meaningful. We'll include that link in the follow-up resources, but really, really thoughtful stuff. And so, you know, as a team here, we're always looking for inspiration and how do we bring this functional movement into our designs. And we primarily, you know, have been working in the web, but we find a lot of inspiration in product design and apps for your phones. So I'm going to jump out of this quickly and pull up Muesli. I'm, again, not sure how to pronounce this.
I don't think there is a right.
Okay. So this is actually a Chrome extension that is very design-centric. If you're a creative person on the phone today, which I'm sure there are a lot of you, our whole team uses this as our homepage on Chrome, and so it surfaces a lot of great content every day.
Beware, though, with great power comes great responsibility, and this is a time-sucked black hole. So It's fantastic, and we are always geeking out about the things that we find, but it's addictive.
Yep, good disclaimer. And so one of my favorite things is every Monday they publish the UI interactions of the week. And like I kind of alluded to, most of these examples are going to come from product design. So I'm going to scroll through. You can see they've got little kind of just snippets of beautiful animations that they've found in interfaces. You know, here is I think this is a calendar. This is a travel app. Mm-hmm. I'm going to scroll down. Here we've got an actual website, so you can see as new content is loading, it's really paced well. And you see the photo fly in and then the text fly in, and it's all very kind of consistent and thoughtful.
And with the abilities of code advancements today, that's why we're starting to see all this transition from pure kind of hard-coded app development into the web, because it can now be supported. We can now tie it in and plug it into CMSs, and so it's much more tangible than it used to be even just a year ago.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And kind of the last part of the functional movement section that I wanted to talk about is is the effect that this can have on the overall user experience. And so I want to talk about perceived performance. So users are inherently impatient, right? We enter a website and we want that content loaded immediately. We have little to no patience. But there are some tricks that we have up our sleeve where, sometimes the reality is you are loading a lot of content in the background. And by using clever, thoughtful animations, you can adjust a user's perceived, perception of the performance. And even if a site is taking a little bit of time to load, users might not notice it. So I've got two examples here. I'm going to reload this one so you can see this is one of the most beautiful loading animations.
I think Jessica wept the first time
she
saw this site of pure joy.
You see it just kind of rotate through, all those percentages, and then the site just gently loads in. With a loading animation that beautiful, I don't even mind that it took not even a couple seconds for that to load. This site also gets the So Hot Right Now seal of approval.
Yeah,
we've got a dark palette, large, beautiful display typography, gradients. So again, this is one of those sites that's leveraging lots of different trends. And then I'm going to actually go back to that Lexus site that Nate showed just a couple minutes ago.
Remember, I showed it first.
You get the credit for it, Nate. And I'm going to show when I transition from section to section. Here we'll go to design. You'll see everything here. Sorry for that. We're going to load this back in. So you see that content, it took a couple seconds to load. If we go to a different section of the site, here we'll go to technology. You see that content fly out. These car parts come together, and then that content flies in. That's very purposeful. That content is going to take a little bit of time to load because so much is happening in the background, but if you thoughtfully use movement, you can really affect the perception of users, and it can reduce a term that's called interstitial anxiety.
Oh.
Big word.
Big key phrase. That's a magic word.
Yep.
Today.
I'm going to repeat that.
Interstitial anxiety.
Yep. And that's something we all feel. I mean, I don't think I knew what the term was until we started talking about it and researching this, but there is some anxiety. Did I click the right button? Is anything happening? And this is a way for your interface to communicate with the user. We are doing something, and that content is going to get to you soon. All right, now let's go back into PowerPoint. Just a couple more slides, and these will be fun to go through anyways.
So this is video. We're going to, again, show some examples both within PowerPoint and live. Video, again, why we're seeing video so much is because of the advancements of not only higher speed connections, but the optimization and performance of browsers, and the way that we're able to take information, compress it, and present it to audiences virtually. So we're going to focus on three different types of video because there's lots of different applications to video. I think particularly in professional services, a lot of times the common perception is that a video is a talking head or the video is a presentation from an event. And there's a lot of ways to incorporate video to be a design element, similar to what we saw with the topography earlier, where it becomes a piece of art. And serves a functional purpose within the design versus just being something that you have to listen to for anywhere from 2 to 30 minutes. So first is the narrative. So video can support a story, a theme, or a brand. So I'm going to pull this site up live. Hopefully this works nicely. Where is this one? Here it is. So this is, again, an Italian site, Vacheron Constantine.
That's pretty good.
Thank you. Give it a second to load here. So they have a series of watches. It's called their International Series, and what they wanted to do for this particular campaign is tour the world and show their watches within the places that give them inspiration. So as I scroll through here, you'll see the different videos play in the background that talk about the different locations that they showcase these watches and the principles of this particular campaign itself. If I'm interested in learning a little bit more about one of these, I can click on Discover. It'll have a nice smooth transition, that functional animation that then loads in the full frame video and introduces me to further content down the page. But again, using video to help tell a story and walk me through kind of that arc of this particular campaign for their overseas tour. Go back to the PowerPoint. Here's an example. This is Jones Day. They actually did a career site that we worked with them on, which turned out fantastic. It uses video as a background element to help tell the story and a narrative behind their brand and what it's like to work with, at Jones Day. So it's their recruiting site, and there's lots of different principles to their recruiting system. And so what we see here is opportunity awaits. They talk about working together. They talk about one firm worldwide, and all the videos that you toggle through as you understand that story support that content in a narrative fashion. Video can also be brand supportive. So here we see Princeton University. They have these large videos that play in the background. This is for their undergraduate admissions site, and they're using it as a way to support their brand. So they want you to know what it feels like to be on the campus of Princeton, because a lot of times when somebody first starts investigating Princeton, they don't necessarily have the resources to go on campus. They may be across the country, maybe across the world. And so what the video in the background of this particular site does is it plays and it shows the interactions on campus among students, among the staff, and it's done really nicely, and it helps reinforce all the brand principles that are displayed within the main hero image. Here is Brutalism. This is another one of our clients. This is a law firm that's headquartered in Miami. And what they really wanted to do was showcase their brand, and so I'm going to pull up their site here. Their brand is all about, they really wanted to let the user understand, let their clients understand what it feels like to kind of be in their office, because they do have that singular office in Miami. It's beautiful. The office itself is quite breathtaking. They have a ton of great art. And so it was almost like being within their space, and we used these storyboards to create these kind of Steadicam shots that allowed you to kind of feel like you were there within the firm and understanding the culture. This is another one Mugatu would be quite proud of, because we're using the large display type, and we're also using a lot of negative space. This is the home page, and it really just drives the user into the navigation. And so the primary navigation is using negative space as an element to draw the user's attention to it. Finally, atmospheric. This site, Time is Money. They use another Mugatu-approved multiple trend approach. In the background of that typography, it's a mask layer, and it just shows videos of the different watches. They're also using a ton of negative space. They're using a large display font, and they're using bold, bright colors. So a lot of different trends we're seeing in this particular one overlap. And this is Red Bull's Best Music of 2017. So they kind of created a rewind our year in music, and it has all these abstract 3D objects in the background that are completely atmospheric. You don't even know what they are. They're not like tangible items that you would ever use in the real world or in real life. They just kind of float in the background, and it's beautifully done. It's not distracting, but it's completely atmospheric in nature.
All right, so our final category are identity systems. First, I'm going to talk through atomic design, and then we're going to talk about some corporate scalable systems that you can look to for inspiration. So atomic design is a pretty hot topic. We actually published a blog post. One of our designers, Alexa Tusky, published that Tuesday, I believe, so it's fresh on the blog. Go check that out. We're just going to kind of give a cursory overview in the presentation today. And atomic design is kind of breaking down your website or app, whatever it might be, into different components, different size components. And so those components are atoms, and that's the most basic level. Then it moves to molecules, organisms, templates, and then pages. And the idea here is to kind of build a system. I'll let that flash through one more time. Is to build a system so that all the different touch points on your site are consistent, and so the user knows what a button looks like, they know what a search field looks like. And another benefit is that it makes for very flexible systems, so you can use different molecules and organisms different ways on different pages. And it's very efficient. So, from a technical perspective, if all your buttons are the same atom and you decide to change from orange buttons to blue buttons, we can make that change in one place, and that would cascade throughout your whole site. So again, atomic design allows for scalable systems that are consistent, flexible, and efficient. So finally, we're going to look at a couple scalable systems for large corporations. The great part about this is that it helps you break the bimodal. So anybody that went to our XLab, you know what that is. If you don't, we've got all those videos posted on the blog. Go check them out. And so what we're seeing is a lot of design-centric organizations are actually publishing their identity systems online. So the first one is Google's material design. That's at material.io. And if we go into the design portion of that, you can see here, these are all the categories. So they first kind of define material design, then they talk about motion, style, layout, components, patterns, all those types of things. So I'm just going to kind of scroll through here just to give you a sense of what you might find there. We've got, imagery examples, units and measurements. So these are kind of like living style guides that live online rather than the traditional printed PDF. And they're great for making all the different touch points consistent. This is why a lot of those Android apps look and feel the same, is because they all use Google's material design. Another shout out to IBM. Nate mentioned the design article, Design is Good Business article earlier. IBM has a great living language style guide that you can view online. And they really kind of just define, all the icons that they use, all the colors that they use, as well as animation. So I think, you've seen motion or animation in a couple of these, and this is how, this is one area where, digital style guides, these digital identity systems differ from a traditional brand guideline.
And we have some clients right now that we're developing these types of assets for, and it's been really beneficial to not only One North, but to them to sustain and maintain and evolve their systems over time.
Yep. And then finally, I've got the example, Uber completely redid their brand last year. They published out their whole style guide, their identity system online, and it's really a beautiful site as well as informational. So I'd encourage you to check that out. Nate, you must have put that in.
I did.
For us. Thank you. But yeah, we're seeing large display text, white space.
Video.
Yeah, so all of those. All right, so those are our main trends. We've got a couple.
Want to make sure we leave some time
Yep.
for Q&A, so we'll quickly go through in conclusion the trends that we aren't so sad to see go.
Bye-bye.
So bye-bye to these trends. The anti-trend, we created a faux mock-up of just, we're calling it Every Corp. And we're really like slaying multiple trends that we are seeing die in one fell swoop. One is the big stock imagery, like the cliched stock photo. Here you can see teamwork, period, lens flare, or puzzle pieces that are supposed to communicate metaphorically generic solutions. But some other elements to this particular design are the carousel, where we're trying to appease the masses and put as much content in this rotating carousel as possible. And what we're finding is people just don't click through carousels. We're also trying to cram a ton of stuff above the mythical fold that doesn't exist. As we've seen with all the sites that we've shown, people are going to scroll. There's no need to try and cram everything here. They're not using any negative space. It's just trying to fit as much information on the page. And we really refer to this as kind of the corporate grid, which was very popular 5 or 6 years ago, but is very far out of touch with what we're seeing kind of user trends nowadays. So we would encourage you to kind of avoid some of those things that we just mentioned in terms of your design principles. So bye-bye, said the origami bird.
And then one final trend that if you're paying attention last year, you might have heard or read about brutalist sites. Here's an article from 2016 that appeared in the Washington Post. Brutalist websites are intentionally ugly, intentionally difficult sites. If you don't believe me, go to brutalistwebsites.com. This is someone that's curated all these sites, and it's kind of, very anti-establishment. We saw a lot of like designer sites follow this aesthetic. This is one of those that I don't think we've ever recommended to a client for professional services. It definitely was a trend last year. It was very hot, but it didn't feel authentic to any of our clients.
I think you tried to sell this one to one of our clients, but it didn't work.
It fell flat.
Yeah.
So, this is a trend that we heard made a lot of noise last year, but we don't anticipate it having staying power. So, bye-bye.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's what we've got. So we've got 4 minutes left. If you've submitted, I think we've got a couple questions that have been submitted to Tanya. We'll pause for 60 seconds and see if any come in.
We're quite articulate,
Yeah.
but there still will probably be questions.
And just a reminder, if you want to submit a question, you can locate it, the chat function, within the green drop-down at the top of your screen or on the right-hand side of your screen as well. So like Jessica said, we're going to take a quick second here to kind of go through the ones that we've gotten, and we'll come back with your answers. So we've gotten a few. The first one is, what are some of the best motion design examples you have seen in general? No need to be specific, and also does One North do motion design?
All right, there's two parts to that question, and I will try to be brief because there are lots of inspirational examples. So we look to a couple places. We look to, there's a site called Code Drops, and that has lots of different examples. We pull inspiration from there pretty regularly. Again, all of the awards sites that, you know, we have referenced today are great examples of motion design. So that's where we look for inspiration.
Moosely as well.
Yep, the UI inspiration, the weekly from Moosely. And then the second part of that question was, does One North do motion design? And even though we absolutely do, it's not a specific offering we have, but when we think of motion now, those are things we do in development, in front-end development. So that's CSS animations using JavaScript. So you'll see more and more of that come through in our work. And it's something we're really excited about, and we're going to continue to do more and more.
It's within the fabric of a lot of the solutions that we create. You know, we don't create motionless websites, period. So there's different degrees of motion. I would say that we can handle varying amounts of degrees. We've done everything from full animations for things like holiday cards to just using motion animation to show transitions and to avoid the interstitial anxiety.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Our next one is guilty as charged on this one. Our site still has carousels. What is the most practical solution or trend for replacing those carousels or galleries?
Good question. You know, I think that's a pretty straightforward answer is just introduce a longer page scroll. You know, people are much more likely to scroll than they are to click through a carousel. And so how we consult our clients is anytime you have a bunch of things buried within a carousel that we have found data showing people aren't going to ever access, you expose it. And you either tighten up your content for that particular page or you expose all the content via a long page scroll. And then that'll work better for mobile, it'll work better for desktop, and you're much more likely to surface that content for users.
Okay, our next question is, how often do you evaluate trends?
Daily.
Constantly.
Yeah. You know, with the Moosely app extension and with some of those other inspirational sites, we're discussing it daily, and that really is the only way to keep up with kind of the breakneck pace that the industry has. We see changes constantly. We're always evaluating trends and best practices. So, yeah, I would say.
I mean, internally, just like cross-functionally through tech, through strategy, through brand, through creative, we're getting dozens of trends a week through IM or emails where we're always sharing new things that we're seeing. So it's a constant evaluation because the web is constantly evolving.
Awesome. Okay, so we are over time. That's all the time we have today. But again, if we didn't get to your question live, we'll follow up with you afterwards. Thank you, Nate and Jessica, and everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank you.